What do you guys think makes a Warframe overpowered? Or is there such thing as a Warframe being overpowered? That's the question that a lot of people have kind of been asking throughout the years of Warframe sort of life cycle, I guess you could say. I would say that there's not many Warframes currently in the game that are necessarily overpowered. And in fact, I like it when we get like offered insane new abilities, or such as abilities that used to exist like Max Polarize. I was a huge fan of just pressing a button and killing every single corpus or enemy that had a shield that was in the room. It's really a question that I guess I wanted to ask you guys, because I always like knowing what you guys think of the current state of Warframe, because it's something that I think about a lot. Even though I don't necessarily play the game as much anymore as I would like to, I definitely prefer the game whenever it had the Void and I could hop into the Void and farm my prime parts there. It's kind of what I did all day, but I'm just not that big of a fan of the relic system. But it's something I think about and I wonder about, because we never really had like a set go-to Warframe aside from maybe Loki, because Loki has kind of always been this sort of jack of all trades frame who was good at everything. He's basically good at defending, he was good at surviving, he was good at dealing damage in the form of using his stealth and using stealth multipliers and all this cool stuff. But does that necessarily make the frame overpowered, and is there such thing as being overpowered in Warframe? Leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments section below, whether you think there is such thing as being overpowered within Warframe, or you think that every frame has sort of the right to excel in a particular aspect. And I think for the most part every frame does sort of excel at least one thing. So would that make a frame that is good at everything overpowered? I don't really think so. If you take a look at some frames such as Oberon or Neja that try to sort of, hit those trends and be good at everything, or have a kit that at least has sort of a mixture of everything in there, these are kind of some of the underwhelming frames, at least in my opinion. You don't see them picked a lot, and they definitely have a lower pick rate compared to a frame which excels at a particular aspect. Take, for example, Nova. Nova is a very good defense frame, a good frame at crowd controlling enemies, making them slowed, good at debuffing enemies so you deal more damage. So a player would more likely choose Nova over a frame such as, let's say, Rhino, if they wanted to kill things really fast, because you get more sort of debuffing aspects coming from Nova than you do buffing aspects coming from Rhino, even though their kits kind of do more or less the same thing. Nova has her crowd control, she has her debuffing enemies, Rhino has his Rhino Stump, and he has his buff to your weapons, so it's like, it's kind of the same thing, but one does it more efficiently than the other. Now, is that a bad thing? I don't know. I think every single frame in the game sort of has its own place on where it could be used, and its own sort of, like, I almost want to say niche. It's just not been fully realized yet, or maybe even implemented into the game yet. Let's take, for example, the past event that we had. I don't really use Limbo that much, but Limbo, at least in my eyes, has two main uses. He's good for protecting AI teammates, and he's good for protecting maybe a player who's a lower level and you just want to carry them through a mission. He's also good at spy missions as well. You just build a duration build on him, and then that's pretty much that, right? So, he's good at that, but he's not really that great at anything else. I would say this Warframe has its own sort of niche. Mag, I used to use her mainly versus Corpus. Now I barely touch Mag because I didn't like how they reworked her. Of course, the rework made her stronger in a way, like in terms of statistics and, using her new ability. I forget the name of it. I think it's Magnetize. But it's basically her bullet attractor ability if you guys are long-term players of the game. Her bullet attractor got reworked, and it made it more of a damage dealing sort of explosion ability, which would attract any sort of incoming bullets to it, and then it'll basically work like Nyx Absorb instead, in a better version of it, right? Where you could just place it on an enemy and it blew up and then it deal a lot of damage. But I don't use her anymore because I don't feel like there's a time or place to use her, if you get what I mean. There's always a frame that does something better in that regard. So that regard being killing things. You know, I could use a frame like Ember. You know, Ember, I press 4, I run for a mission, everything dies. Even Equinox does that. Saren used to be my go-to for that until they reworked her, you know. They made it so that Saren is more used within a mission where you're standing still, you're defending a point, you put down your little decoy, you put the spores on it, you keep on shooting the spores, and that spreads an infection for all the enemies, and that's cool, you know. It deals a lot of damage, and it basically changed the role of which Saren played. Saren used to be an absolute nuke. You just run into a room, press 4, and everything would be dead after 1 or 2 presses of the 4 key, right? So her purpose kind of switched. So I feel like every frame in the game sort of has its own purpose, its own sort of thing that it can do, and I'm not going to go through every single one of them in this video, but it's finding what makes a Warframe overpowered, which I'm in a way interested in, because a lot of people would point to Loki and say, well, Loki is the most overpowered because he has crowd control, he can buff his damage up with his stealth multiplier, he can, you know, he's just a very awesome frame, he can go invisible, basically avoiding bullets and all that cool stuff. He has a very high energy capacity, he's a very fast Warframe, and you're really good at dodging bullets with Loki. He's like a caster frame, right? But he's almost like an invincible caster frame, he can never die. Same with Ivara, you know, she has almost the exact same kit, but in a sense where she can deal a lot more damage with her finishers. She can make an enemy go into the unaware or sleeping state where you can, you know, deal a finisher on them. So, you know, Loki and Ivara are 2 of the most, I want to say, powerful frames in the game. I don't necessarily want to say overpowered, because we haven't really established if there is such thing as being overpowered in Warframe, because it's not to say that, you know, every single frame has its potential to excel in a particular aspect, which might deem them to be overpowered, right? So let's take, for example, Banshee. You know, she can press 4 and she can crowd control an entire defense interception mission and just stay there. You just have to sit still and have the energy to back yourself up just by pressing 4. Have enough range, have enough efficiency, have enough energy, you're good to go, right? So you can just press 4 and basically stay AFK for that mission and solo it, or whatever the case may be. Make it a breeze. Same with Ember. You can press 4, you can kill everything. You know, so every frame has its own purpose. Every frame has its own sort of unique aspect which stands out about it. Some frames have more than others, which is what I'm kind of hinting at here, to be the more powerful, overpowered frames, if you will. So, like I said, I'm not going to go out and say that Loki is overpowered, because is there such thing as being overpowered in Warframe? That's just a question that I want you guys to answer. I want you guys to tell me if there is such thing as being overpowered within Warframe. Do you think it's right to call a Warframe overpowered? Or do you think that because it's a player versus environment game, and it kind of sells itself on the fact that, oh yeah, well, you're this awesome space ninja that can kill everything, do you think that being overpowered would necessarily be a bad thing? Because in a sense, every single frame, what I'm trying to get at here, is overpowered, because they're good at one specific thing. They excel at it, they're good at it, and they can make use of that and, you know, really excel at it and make it seem as if they're overpowered, when in reality they're just doing their job really, really well. And that's what a frame is sort of intended to do. So would you necessarily say that Frost's Frost defense is overpowered because you can put a globe around a defense point? No, you wouldn't say that that's overpowered, because it has counters to it. But there's not counters to every single thing in the game. So, for example, you know, you can't counter, let's say, what can't you counter? Like, realistically, you couldn't counter Nova's M Prime apart from the use of nullifiers, which versus Grenier, you know, that's just not a problem, because Nova, you know, you just press the button and everything's slowed. You can't counter without a nullifier, really. Every single frame would be able to play their own role and just get away with it, you know? That's why a lot of people don't like nullifiers. They think that they're kind of out of place. I think nullifiers are a good thing because it kind of invests you in the game a little bit more. I definitely do agree that they were kind of annoying and harder to counter back in the day whenever their full bubble was expanded, like as they spawned. But you know, it's kind of just down to the player's opinion whether they think that a frame is overpowered in a particular aspect, and it also comes down to the player's knowledge on what they think of particular frames, you know. Let's say, for example, Atlas. I don't feel like Atlas really serves a purpose. He's a fun frame to play, don't get me wrong. You can go around, you can one-punch enemies, but he doesn't really have a purpose, and that's kind of counterintuitive to what I was saying. Like, every frame has a purpose, but I feel like Atlas is one of those frames which doesn't really have a purpose yet. So I feel like there's going to be something that's implemented into the game which Atlas is going to be good at, you know? Because as the game develops, as the game goes on, we begin to sort of see that every single frame has its own unique purpose to it, you know, or at least added to it. Like, I would never have thought about Limbo coming into the meta for that recent event that just passed. The passes, I can't say that word. The passicism, I can't say it. You know, you know what event I'm talking about. That event, you know, I would never have thought that Limbo would have just, you know, been a go-to pick for that event until that event eventually came around. Same thing with Mesa, let's say, for example. Mesa, whenever she was first released, you pressed 4 and you held down the trigger, and that basically killed every single enemy that was in your line of sight. However, Digital Extremes deemed this overpowered, or other players deemed this overpowered, and then it got nerfed, you know? Do you think that nerf was justified in a sense? Because really, all that they've done is they've changed it to where you just have to move your mouse around a little bit more. So realistically, they didn't nerf it. They just made the mechanic different. You have to do something to make it happen. Which with a lot of these frames, you do have to put in a certain amount of effort to make things happen. Like with Loki Prime's Radial Disarm. You actually have to get the augment. You have to form of the frame and get it to the point where he can use that augment, manage your energy efficiently. But then again, you have to do that with every single frame. So it's just some food for thought, really, in terms of thinking more about the frame's abilities, where they can be used if they're overpowered. Personally, I would say that the most overpowered thing in the game to this point would either be the amount of crowd control that you can throw out at enemies, which, you know, I understand is pretty awesome. Like, let's say for Valvin, you can just throw out a Bastille, enemies are crowd control, they can't come at you. How tanky a particular frame can be, let's say for example Valkyr, Wukong, or a Naros. You take one of those frames in with a Blood Rush body count combo and maybe throw a Life Strike in there somewhere. Those frames are basically unkillable, right? You have a very not overpowered, but a very powerful melee weapon because of that Blood Rush body count combo, where you can basically stay in a endurance run or a survival mission for a very long time because of that combination that you have. So it really comes down to, do you think these things are allowed to be in the game? Do you think these things are things that make the game what it is? And do you think that being overpowered, I'm pretty sure I've asked this question before, but do you think being overpowered is fun? I would say hell yeah. It makes the game, you know, feel just a lot more better, because you just jump in there and you do the thing that you want to do, and you do it like in a really badass style. That's why whenever we get nerfs to things like Mag's polarized ability or Mace's peacemakers, it kind of upsets me in a sense, and I really didn't agree with the Excalibur nerf. We also got a nerf on Excalibur where it took away sort of his feeling of being an absolute badass. You know, it nerfed the range on his Exalted Blade. It made it had damage drop off. It just kind of ruined him for me in a sense. I wouldn't say Ash's Blade Storm was a bad change, because, you know, I think that ability just kind of annoyed everybody. But, you know, there's some changes in the game which I guess they're needed changes in terms of the game's balance, and I guess not necessarily spamming abilities, spamming overpowered abilities, but they're needed in a sense of, you know, just making the game more like a game where you actually have to play it instead of just pressing a button. But it takes away the sense of being an absolute badass away from the player, which is something that I used to enjoy. So that's my question for you guys. Do you think, would you rather have a game where every single thing is overpowered and it's really awesome at doing like what it's supposed to do? Or would you ever have a completely balanced game where every frame has, I want to say, the opportunity to sort of die, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. Now, I'm not saying that we should throw in frames which are basically just god tier, but what I'm trying to say here is, like, would you rather have a game where everything is balanced and there's nothing that which sort of sticks out? What makes a Warframe, in your eyes at least, overpowered? You know, what's the purpose of other Warframes whenever there's frames which do particular things to a lot better of an extent? And just like, really, you know, would you rather have a super overpowered frame or a completely balanced game? And if a frame does become overpowered, would you be the type of guy to complain about that said frame? That's really all I wanted to talk about today. Kind of make you think a little bit about the game and the frames within it, and maybe just start a discussion in the comments section about what direction you want to see the Warframes go. Do you want to see more powerful Warframes, which might have an impact on how the game plays, or how a defense mission plays, or a mobile defense, or whatever the case may be? Or do you rather just have just this mediocre sort of jack-of-all-trades frame that, you know, we kind of get? Like, some frames that come to mind, at least in my opinion, are Oberon, Nezha, and Atlas. I just think those frames are kind of underwhelming in terms of their abilities, where they can't really excel at any one thing. They're not good at one thing. They're just okay at everything, I guess. But yeah, that's it. That's going to be it for the next video. If you liked it, hit that like button below, and you want to see more Warframe content from me, hit subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.